Thank you for joining us for this meeting of the CGI Action Network. It's the first of 4 sessions we'll be holding this week to drive action toward long-term resilience in the Caribbean. Wherever you're tuning in from, I hope you and your loved ones are staying healthy and safe from this very active hurricane season we're all dealing with in real time. The wildlife fires raging across the West Coast of the United States, and of course, the COVID-19 epidemic. It's now been 3 years since Hurricanes Irma and Maria struck. That's what led us to start this action network. And while we've made some good progress toward the recovery, our work is clearly more urgent than ever. The Caribbean now faces the dual threat of extreme weather events from climate change and the pandemic. The situation is especially challenging as the pandemic has halted tourism, which is so critical to any economic recovery in the region, while the threat of future storms could disrupt the systems and the infrastructure that help prevent the spread of COVID. As the region balances the long-term need to invest in resilient infrastructure with the immediate need to respond to COVID-19 and face the current hurricane season, it's important, more important than ever, that we find innovative solutions that reach across islands and across all sections of the economy. Now we'll have 2 panels today and the sessions that we have throughout the week. I hope they'll all help all of you who are tuning in learn more about the specific needs of the Caribbean region, listen to the important work our friends and partners are doing, and think about how you and your organization can fit into their efforts to build a greener, more inclusive, more sustainable economic and public health recovery. CGI is not about what we can't do, it's about what we can do, given all of our limitations, to solve problems and improve lives. The members of this action network have already proven that they can do things, and I know we can do now what we need to do to meet this moment.
With COVID-19, the world stopped, and a once-in-a-generation opportunity appeared to reevaluate how we live, work, and what we want for our future. By working directly with communities, local authorities, and global partners, we're committed to building a safer, healthier, equitable future for the Caribbean.
For over 60 years, the Red Cross has been working with vulnerable communities in every Caribbean country to build their resilience. Although COVID-19 has presented unprecedented challenges, we are using the opportunity to build back greener.
Through this recovery plan, we will help develop sustainable livelihood practices, strengthen the communities, exchanging knowledge and awareness to boost environmentally responsible solutions. We want to create resilience, not only to COVID-19, but to all threats. We firmly believe that the recovery actions launched by this crisis can be the catalyst to the region's green transformation.
We are championing ecosystem-based approaches and community-based initiatives that promote climate-smart actions hand-in-hand with disaster preparedness priorities. Partnership is key. We have recognized that our work is even more successful when we accompany communities to connect with partners like you in their resilience journey.
Hi, my name is Jose M. Santos Valderrama, General Coordinator of Bosque Modelo of Puerto Rico. We are a non-profit organization led by a multi-sector community network composed by 35 community-based organizations that works with the sustainable development of communities in a rural region composed by 32 municipalities. As the solar energy sector expanded in Puerto Rico following the 2017 power outage, Bosque Modelo determined that solar energy could be an important part of the solution. by providing much needed clean energy and resilience, creating new economic opportunities for women in the region and closing the gender gap in the electrical sector. Participants have to complete 100 hours of academic contact and 20 hours of laboratory training. As part of the direct hands-on training, the participants will complete solar installations at 3 community centers. Also, we provided support with stipends for childcare and travel and paid internships for participants with solar companies in Puerto Rico. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to reorganize the solar training program using a virtual platform. 17 participants completed the academic virtual sessions with an 83% average of success rate, and the first community installation was done. We plan to complete solar energy internships and 2 more community installations in September 2020.
Thank you very much. We're going to start now. I want to introduce our panelists. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, thank you for being with us again this year. And thank you for all you're struggling with at home.
Thank you very
The
much.
Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, Francesco La Camera, thank you for being here. And the Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, Inger Anderson, thank you for being here. I'd like to start with Prime Minister Mottley. I know that COVID has created enormous challenges for Barbados and for the tourism-based economies all over the Caribbean. First, tell us how you're doing, and second, tell us what specific support you're looking for and what all the people who are listening in today and watching can be thinking about that would help you the most.
Thank you very much once again, and it's a pleasure to sit and talk with you. I enjoy it every time we do. We're doing okay. We are holding in. It's been very, very rough, obviously, since March. We have just under 180 cases, roughly, of persons who have had COVID. 95% of them have been imported. There's been no major community spread at all. In the early days, we did have local people being affected, but we've managed to be able to reduce that to an absolute minimum. And part of the difficulty is really balancing the challenge between lives and livelihoods, because as a tourism and travel dependent economy, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, we've effectively seen most of our hotels receive zero revenue from their normal sources. And to the extent that any of them are open, it's just to facilitate quarantine and isolation. And we're now trying to build back up the travel industry, but it depends on the risk rating of the countries that we're receiving people from. As it relates to the hurricane season, well, it's business as usual. This has been a very active season. I think all over throughout the region and the United States of America, we're still lucky that it hasn't been worse in terms of damage as compared to the intensity of storms and systems coming out. We have a saying in Barbados, what hasn't caught you hasn't passed you. And I suspect that the next 2 weeks of September, as well as the early part of October, is going to be very, very challenging. At the moment, however, our major consequence from climate crisis has been in the drought and the absence of water, and that is really wreaking serious havoc for ordinary households and farmers. And when you add to that the sargassum weed, which continues to plague coastal establishments, then we are still very much on the front line of the climate crisis.
You recently made some interesting news internationally with your welcome stamp program, which allows temporary visas for digital nomads. Depending on what happens in the United States, you may have a lot more takers.
Well, I hope that you'll be one to take us.
I'd love to be a digital nomad in Barbados, but tell us how that's going and why you did it and how it's part of your longer term strategy.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. We did it largely because obviously short-term tourism is going to be very challenging given the requirements and protocols for persons to test and where necessary quarantine. And to date, we've had just about 1,400 applications. We've approved just about 1,150 of those. We've probably got about 400 people on island already. So that's doing well because, of course, those persons are not coming for 7 days. They're coming in some instances for 3 months, 4 months. Some are actually going to stay the whole year. Some are going to go back and forth. And another interesting thing developed since we've launched it, and that is for students. We had I think NBC carried a little story about students from Yale who had relocated here. And it actually makes sense, especially for a lot of international students in the USA and Canada. I have a niece from Australia who's studying in New York, who'll probably do her time here rather than Australia because of the time differences. And for students, we will not be charging any fees. We'll waive all fees for those students who want to come and do their studying here because they're on the same time zone as those universities, particularly on the Eastern Seaboard in the USA and Canada. With respect to why we're doing it, 2 years ago when we won the government, I established a National Population Commission, and it is reported and made very clear that we have literally not replaced our population since 1980. And we are in the process now of settling arrangements for a new immigration bill. We're likely to have to do like Canada and have a managed migration framework that allows us to be able to boost our population because we have a declining labor force, and we literally have more people going into retirement on an annual basis and coming into the workforce. So we have all the demographics actually of a developed country, and we need to intervene and manage that so that we can boost the numbers of persons coming to work to produce. Put it in context, Singapore is 20% larger than us in terms of land size, but has a population size 15 times our population. And we don't necessarily want to go where Singapore is in terms of population, but we definitely have to increase beyond where we are while keeping a very close eye, and Inga will appreciate this, to balance development with respect to what is sustainable and what allows us to be resilient as we go forward. Obviously, the COVID has done serious damage to our ability to be able to move in the direction of financing for resilient growth, because all Caribbean countries now, as travel and tourism dependent as we are having to find that we're spending the money to be able to sustain those families that have lost their jobs in the tourism sector. It's responsible for about 40 to 50% of GDP directly and indirectly. And therefore, just being able to keep our heads above water is a challenge. But at the same time, we are going to ensure that we have the proper health systems in place. We've refurbished an old US Naval base as a hospital, and we haven't had to use much of it, but we had to do it to prepare ourselves. So when you do these things, you would appreciate that finding the space, the fiscal space, the debt space to be able to finance resilient growth is going to be a challenge. And that's why we've argued that COVID-related debt ought to be insulated, refinanced into long-term debt, almost like the war bonds coming out of the UK in World War II, to allow us a moratorium of maybe 5 years for 50, 60-year debt, low interest rates, near zero. But that will allow us to resume the development path for resilient growth and resilience in our economies to help us solve the other problem, which is climate. So the pandemic really has destabilized the region in terms of our macroeconomic fundamentals and how the global community sees that and says to travel and tourism dependent countries, look, we are prepared to help you isolate your debt so that you can resume the normal development trajectory. And this is a matter that we hope to be able to find like-minded countries and institutions to help us to advocate.
Well, first of all, let me say, I agree with you. And that's a problem that even wealthy countries are going to face. Because we learned in the United States, we had allowed serious gaps to develop in our public health network. And we've spent a lot of money and we need to spend more. But we can't repay that debt at future interest rates if they return to normal. It'll swallow up everything. No country will escape this. So what we need to do, I think, is to wall it off and let it be paid back at the interest rates that exist now, which are basically zero, almost negative, so that
That's
we
right.
can resume economic growth. I'd like to ask our next two panelists to talk a little bit about, first, the connection between COVID and climate change, and secondly, how sustainable development, and we'll start with you, Director General, with the renewable energy, is both an economic policy and an environmental policy, and one that will reduce the risks of future paralyses from things like COVID, because we're going to continue to have these viral and bacteriological events occur crossing national borders, I think, for quite a while. And we have to deal with a lot of them at the source. So I'll go to you. I'm very supportive of what you're trying to do. As you know, I spent a lot of my life unsuccessfully arguing that the United States should become completely clean energy and independent, but we need to keep working on it. And the Caribbean is a great laboratory for you, because the whole region could be carbon free with more jobs, more businesses, and more resilience. And we need to do it now because they're in such economic distress. So talk a little about how you see this. Why is renewable energy one of the pathways to building back not only greener, but better?
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me say that, first of all, that is for me an honor to have the chance to have this talk with you, that you had made history in your country and in the world. I'm also very pleased to be in this panel with the Prime Minister Maya Motley. I really enjoy, in the occasion of the Climate Summit, his intervention. I loved it. It was really something. And naturally, Inga is a friend of mine. We are working together, and we will work with strength and collaboration between ARENA and the UNEP. So the first reaction to your question concerning the link between the COVID-19 and the climate change is the way we are going to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So how we want to give new life to our economy, to our institution. This is the question. The fact is that if we are going in trying to recovering, bailing out the past, so support the oil and gas company and think like that, the result will be that we just will produce stranded assets for tomorrow. We are just already in our report on costs, we have demonstrated how a large part of all core power next year will be stranded out because of the much economic choice of renewables. So the link is that if you want a more resilient energy system, and we have seen this month that the only source of energy that has not been impacted by the COVID has been renewables. In non-electricity system, the share of renewable has been increasing, and the other has been declining. So this exercise has proven very clearly that renewables are the most resilient way to produce energy. From an economic and social point of view, we have demonstrated and we have estimated that in the first 3 years, the response of the COVID, if we go for renewables, we will get an increase in jobs of more than 5.5 million in this period. And in the same period, we are going to gain in terms of GDP 1 point per year. So going for renewable in responding to the COVID and trying to connect the short-term response to long-term objective of the Paris Agreement and the sustainable development will be not goals will be not only a good choice for an environmental point of view, but will be a good choice for an energy point of view, from an economic point of view, and a social point of view. So all these things together bring to me to say these are the links and which are the reason for choosing renewables in this period. Last comment on your last question. Caribbean is a very particular area where ARENA is already present and is collaborating with many countries. We are providing support from a knowledge base point of view, but we are also trying to support them in the project phase. There are many countries. We can hopefully go on deep on this in this chat, and so we can say how we are supporting those countries. And it's important to say that going for renewable for them could be the way to create a new fiscal space where the boost policies that the Prime Minister was talking about, so bringing people to work, could be possibly more easy to provide for.
One of the things that I think is important is to tie resilience to green energy in a way that recognizes that the Caribbean both has unlimited potential, but also significant challenges. I remember when I went to the U.S. Virgin Islands after the storms in 2017, they had two big solar fields. One was completely intact and the other had been wrecked by the storms, but it could have been protected had the technology then available for resilience, for embedded solar tech, been used better where the fields were. So I think that you'll be in a position, I hope, not just in the Caribbean, but especially here, because that's what we're talking about, to beat back these people that say that, well, if you live in a place with a lot of storms, it's going to blow up your windmills or blow up your solar panels whenever you have a storm. That's simply not true. But the work I had trying to help fix what I saw in the Caribbean, in the Virgin Islands, really made that apparent. And I'd like to go to Inger now. You know, the Prime Minister Motley, among our other many achievements, just deployed 33 electric buses in Barbados. So you now have the largest green public transportation fleet in the Caribbean. Could you talk a little bit, Inger, about what you think that the role of the UN can be in helping bring attention to the Caribbean, and what you think the Caribbean can do by becoming a laboratory for the rest of the world?
Great honor to be here today and to have this opportunity to speak with you and with Prime Minister Motley. What I will say is, first of all, that the Caribbean really, we've seen some great leadership, but we've also seen a region and countries that are more exposed to climate change than any other than together with the Pacific Island states, obviously. And so the kind of leadership that we've seen, even in this pandemic, where the early stimulus included, for example, here in Barbados, the Bahamas, as well as in other countries, it included housing, renewable energy, housing programs, smart things like this. The fact that we have electric vehicles and buses running on the streets of your beautiful country, Madam Prime Minister, is a signal of the kind of leaning in. But that means that the rest of the world needs to lean in too. The rest of the world needs to step up and provide for solidarity, multilateral responses along the lines that you mentioned, Madam Prime Minister. And there are some real opportunities here, and this is maybe what the world can learn from. There are these bailouts that are happening. $12 trillion have gone out in public bailouts, and more will follow. Not enough has gone out in solidarity. Much has gone to countries paying to themselves, number one. Number two, many of these bailouts have not had the right kind of green incentives attached to them. Investments in nature-based solutions, investments in smart double, triple, quadruple returns, the kind of destruction that you spoke about where one solar field was intact and another was not. What kind of coastal forest could one have provided around it? So the nature's infrastructure, in addition to the hard infrastructure, and being mindful of both. The kind of subsidies and tax reductions that one can do to drive green products, and the removal of subsidies for polluters, obviously, and using that kind of stimulus for green R&D subsidies. These are the kind of things, and not deregulating on environment, ensuring that there's no regression on the environmental dimensions that have already been put in place, but because it's that line that will guarantee the future. The Caribbean has some of the highest electricity prices in the world. That's because it's a region that is beholden to importing fuel, as we well know. But it also has some of the highest wind velocity, we know that the hard way, and the highest solar radiation. So at this time, and this is when energy prices is at an all-time low, there is an opportunity to keep them a little bit higher and use that as a tax on income potentially in some countries. Whether it's a Caribbean choice, that depends on the current fiscal situation, and the Prime Minister has outlined that that's hard. But in the rest of the world, using that difference between the low price and the current price towards pricing carbon, so that we can see a real shift. And maybe just a word on COVID itself, because you, Mr. President, referenced that it might not be the last, and it isn't the first. COVID-19 is a zoonosis. A zoonotic disease, we know, HIV/AIDS, Ebola, H1N1, bird flu, etc. Each of these, why did they come about? They came about because we didn't take care of nature. They came about because we fragmented, illegally traded, deforested, and interfered with the natural way of things. So as we are seeing climate change increase, it's therefore impacting our ecosystems, we might very well also see increase in the incidences of zoonosis. Therefore, investing in climate adaptation and mitigation, planting trees, taking care of ecosystems, is very much part and parcel of the solution. And here, the Caribbean, although small landmass, has actually done really well to take care of the planted and the regenerative side of ecosystem. So lots to be learned from there. It is a laboratory for the world, but it's a laboratory that needs solidarity and multilateral support.
Thank you very much. You all have so much to say, and you're doing so much. I think that we should use the last 3 minutes or so to let you make any specific requests you could have. You've got other people who are listening. What do you want other people to do? What do you need the most? What can we do to help? And just say whatever you want, because I think, so Mia?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Basically, we've just launched the biggest intervention into the private sector to sustain our tourism industry, which is desolate at the moment. We're opening back up slowly, but I've made it conditional on them greening and on them also digitizing, because we're not going to agree to pay unemployment benefit at 60% when I can bring back workers and help the employers pay at 80%. Give them long-term loans, which is what we're asking for the country as well. Because if we get that at the country level, we can do more. We also launched a major house ownership program. It's actually called HOPE, Homeowners Providing Energy. I think that, Mr. President, you know a lot about somewhere called HOPE, whether HOPE Arkansas or HOPE, the belief that we can be better. So that those two things are indicative of where we want to go to be carbon neutral by 2030. But the truth is, as Inga said, and as Francesco has hinted, we need help. We need the multilateral support. We need the solidarity. If we can get our COVID debt refinanced into long-term debt, if we can get understanding that debt raised during COVID will not go into our debt to GDP numbers, or we reset the fiscal anchors that we're being held to, if we can get also a trust that provides grant and concessional funding, a Caribbean resilience and growth trust that will help us position the region to be able to continue the path on building resilience as we face this awful every year hurricanes and throughout the year droughts and sargassum, then I believe that we will find a way. And it's not a large sum of money to the global community, but because we're on the front line and with the Warsaw Mechanism on loss and damage never having been actualized, we are suffering. And we really, really need the world to accept that if we were private individuals, you'd probably bring a tortious action because your actions have caused our, not you as in you, President Clinton, but the world's actions have caused us to be where we are today. Okay?
Look, I always believe the Caribbean should be a laboratory for the future. And people should look at it that way. I'll give you one practical example. I beat my head against the wall after the Haitian earthquake in 2010 to get them to restructure the entire electricity system. And one of the things I learned there, and to a lesser extent in the Dominican Republic and some other places we were working, is everybody knew they should switch to solar and wind. And they knew it would be economical, and they knew whoever heard of saving the planet and lowering your electric bills, right? I mean, they can do that. In the Caribbean, we can do it everywhere with no subsidies, just change from X to Y. But there are all these long-term contracts that have been signed for diesel fuel and other things in country after country. And there was no mechanism to help people get out of them. It's just practical things like that. That needs to be done. If you usually there's a reason, even beyond occasional corruption, why people don't make changes that are self-evidently in their economic interest. And the old system still has tentacles that we need to break. Even in places committed to green energy, like Puerto Rico, like the Virgin Islands and other places, I see it all the time. So I think the international community needs to think about how they can buy out some of this legacy cost, and we'll get the investors in there to do it because the power rates are so high that it's a win-win for everybody to lower the power rates and green the energy.
No, we welcome the investment. And as I said, 30% of the investment has to be local. But other than that, we welcome the investment to make the transformation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You.
We only had a half an hour, but I think you did a lot of good. Thank you, Inger. Thank you, Francesco. And thanks, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.
I'm Steve Smith, the President and CEO of Airlink, a disaster response nonprofit, and our program is called Aviation Cares. CARES stands for the Coordinated Air Response for Emergency Supplies. In collaboration with partners in the aviation, freight forwarding, and disaster response nonprofit sectors, Airlink has executed a dynamic distribution mechanism to support NGOs responded to COVID-19 around the world. Now, by supporting the movement of this emergency cargo and aid workers in the air freight market, that has seen deep cuts in capacity and double-digit increases in freight prices, our program has enabled the equipping of frontline medical staff and volunteers with vital protective equipment, as well as the delivery of hygiene kits and fresh water filtration systems to improve COVID-19 preventative measures for fragile communities across the globe. This has been possible because of air freight logistics expertise, leveraging economies of scale and partnership. The Aviation Cares program continues to deliver COVID-19 related aid, and we are still seeking funding and new partners to meet that demand. COVID-19 has made every subsequent disaster a health crisis, changing the dynamic of disaster response itself. The most obvious change being the need for personal protective equipment and the careful deployment of volunteers to limit infection. This has created a range of challenges, but our program continues to find solutions for NGOs.
Good day. I'm Christy Payne, Communications Manager for NBW, a nonprofit organization in the United States Virgin Islands, working with youth ages 16 to 24 in workforce development through mentoring, education, counseling, on-the-job training, and job placement. Founded in 2007, NBW now trains in carpentry, construction, electrical, plumbing, CAD/CAM programming, marine rebuild and repair, culinary arts, and customer service with a success rate of 70 to 80%. NBW also stands in the gap for our community during times of disaster. In 2017, after the devastating storms Irma and Maria, by mass feedings and home repairs, and now, with COVID-19, serving over 37,000 meals to vulnerable individuals, all with our trainees leading the charge.
Hi, my name is Nicole Lake. I'm 18. I am a trainee for the Marine program at my brother's workshop.
My name is Jahin Kofi, and I am a trainee at my brother's workshop, and we're working on mahogany tables for cruise bay landing St. John.
Thank you very much for joining us for this panel. We're going to talk about the role of sustainable energy and other factors in rebuilding the tourism sector, which is critical to managing our way through another tough storm season and obviously getting over the crippling effects of COVID-19. We're joined by Prime Minister Alan Chestnut. It's good to see you again. We were together a couple of years ago to develop to dedicate a wonderful little solar field in St. Lucia, and I appreciate all the stuff that you're doing down there. I want to thank Gloria Guevara, the President and CEO of the World Tourism and Travel Council, and my old friend, Ambassador Erwin LaRocque, the Secretary General of CARICOM. Thank you for being here. Let's get right to it. I think it's really important that we recognize, the world recognize, the unusual blow that the Caribbean took in tourism because of its reliance on tourism, and how it's now being compounded by one of the worst storm seasons in the history of the region. Prime Minister Chestnut, tourism accounts for 65% of St. Lucia's GDP. Can you tell us a little about the impact that it's had? And when you reopened in June, you've had a few thousand visitors. What's the projection going forward, and what do you need in terms of support from the international community?
Well, thanks again, Mr. President. It's great to see you again, and I certainly remember our visit very fondly. My wife says to say hello as well. The impact has been pretty severe. Our tax revenue is down about 50%. And people hear these statistics and sometimes they don't understand the reality of what it is. So in the context of St. Lucia, I'm seeing a drop of $600 million in tax revenue. And as you remember from your days of being president, tax revenue is what we classify as being free capital. And I'm having to replace that free capital now with debt. So St. Lucia's debt to GDP has gone from 59%, so we were able to achieve the threshold of 60% in the 4 years I've been here as Prime Minister, to now 85%. And sadly, we have no idea what's going to happen next year. So is there going to be a continual reduction of tax revenues? And therefore, is there going to be another gap that we have to finance? So the impact has been severe. And then on top of that, Mr. President, we have a situation where our expenditures have gone up. So we've had to put in social stabilization programs. We've had to, like Prime Minister Motley, build a new hospital, a respiratory hospital. We've had to run hotels here to allow our nationals to come back home, because sadly, voluntary quarantining doesn't work. So therefore, we have to have a quarantining. All these have added a significant cost to the government. So at one point, your revenues are going down, and the other point, your costs are going up. St. Lucia has been successful, and I would say too, we've been successful because we've adopted a term from very early called coexisting with COVID. We could see from March that there was not going to be any immediate solution to COVID. And sadly, the idea of remaining locked down is not a realistic one for us. Because despite all of the empirical evidence as to how we're suffering, sadly, we see that the global architecture, the global national economic architecture is not suited to be able to move quickly. We saw it with climate change. I mean, here we were where we had hurricanes, all the evidence was clear. OECD still is using per capita GDP to classify access to ODA funds. It still takes in excess of 5 years to get a project off the ground. There's still not a dedicated fund for small island developing states to access for climate change. And the worst part of all of this is that this debt is accumulating, and clearly everybody can see that it's not sustainable and no change has been made. So now with the pandemic, it would be unrealistic on our part to think that there was going to be a global solution. So the last question, which is the most important, St. Lucia has been, with some of the other islands in the Caribbean, advocating that the airline industry take up the challenge of pre-testing persons globally before they travel. We have to see a recovery of the hotel or travel industry, not just for the Caribbean, but globally. And the fact is that people do not feel comfortable traveling. We've not put in the necessary protocols to give them that comfort. After 9/11, the TSA and other security agencies around the world did a fantastic job of developing protocols that regained the public's confidence to travel. And sadly, with this pandemic, we have not done that. And I'm at pains to explain to the United States, to Canada, UK, to Europe, that long-haul travel is an industry in itself. So for instance, every American that comes down to the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean I can speak specifically to, almost 75 to 80 cents of every dollar they spend goes back to the United States of America. It's your airlines, your travel agents. Most of the food supplies, the liquor, the food, the shipping companies, the brands, all come from the United States of America. So it behooves America and Canada and UK and Europe to see a recovery. The Caribbean has shown tremendous resilience and tremendous discipline. So we've only had 27 cases. We've had no deaths. And we have been open for business. So we've shown that you can coexist with COVID. And to your point of being an incubator for the rest of the world, we've done it. If we can learn from the lessons of the Caribbean, start applying them across the board. I mean, my good friends in Canada are living in a cave. No border openings. It's unbelievable. And airlines are sitting down losing millions of dollars a day. I mean, I'm hearing that Air Canada by March is going to lose close to dollars. How do we recover those losses? What is the world going to look like afterwards? And then to feel our pain, I'm sitting there with the IFIs who are telling me, okay, we understand why you've done what you've done this year, but you need to give me commitments to fiscal discipline next year. I mean, we don't even know what next year's economy is going to look like. So we need help. We need an immediate, urgent meeting to discuss the global architecture as it pertains to SIDS. We all now understand that after World War II, when we had Bretton Woods and the UN and we had World Bank and the IMF, small island development states didn't exist. So none of these rules were built with us in mind. There has to be an urgent meeting because you would have thought the crisis of climate change would have gotten everybody to the table. It did not. We see what's taking place with the pandemic right now, which is when everybody's taking care of themselves, very similarly to what happened after the financial crisis when the G7 became the G20, but the rest of the world was left behind. There was no space for us at the table. There's never been a plan to figure out how we were going to solve the problems with the debt that we incurred, and nobody cared. All we here, we have to get our debt to GDP to 60%. We have to go to climate change. The greatest opportunity that's coming up, and I don't know, Mr. President, if you've given this much thought, is this idea of a carbon tax, which I love. But the problem is emissions in America do not remain in the American hemisphere. They go into a Columbus hemisphere. So what portion of that carbon tax, which is going to be taxed at the point of production, and how is that going to be shared among the rest of us? And as Prime Minister Motley indicated, because of our proximity to the equator, we're on the front line. And we have the empirical evidence, we have the intellectual evidence to show that we are in crisis. So these are some of the solutions that we would certainly like to get help on.
Thank you. Gloria?
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Mr. President, for having us. And I love what the Prime Minister say, and I couldn't agree more. WTTC represents the global private sector. A little bit over 200 CEOs around the world are our members. We have had the honor of hosting you, President, in the past. And I couldn't agree more. What we need right now, and that's what WTTC is working with governments, is an international testing protocol. We need to test before departure, and we need to resume international travel. As the Prime Minister said, yes, we can coexist. Something that we do is we do a lot of research. We not only quantify the economic impact, and that's how we know the importance of travel and tourism in the Caribbean. In the globe is 1 in 10 jobs. In the Caribbean is 1 in 7, and in some islands is 1 or every 4 jobs. But I would say also, we need to learn from the past, and we do a lot of research regarding that, not only in terms of protocols, but also we were able to travel after Ebola, SARS, and MERS. Why was that? Because we were able to isolate the people infected. Yes, COVID is different, but now we know much more about COVID. And if we can stop exporting the virus by doing testing on departure, that would be great to resume international travel. And on top of that, of course, wearing the mask, having the protocols that would allow us to have travelers long haul. We need to understand also the impact, as the Prime Minister was saying. The rest of the world is big in domestic travel. The average is like 85%. In the case of the Caribbean, it's not like that. You cannot incentivize just domestic travel and hope that you will survive. They are depending on international travel. So it is very important to here align the world. We're working with the G7 +3, and we're working with the G20. But I have to tell you, it has been very complicated. And the quarantines that we have seen in some countries imposing, for instance, to flying back from the Caribbean are not helping. So we hope to reach an agreement sometime soon. But my request, and now that I have the Prime Minister here, if I may, it will be wonderful if the Caribbean at the same time can get an alignment, because within the multiple islands and beautiful countries that we have in that region of the world, we also have different opinions and not a clear alignment. And sometimes us from the private sector is very complicated to invest and help them to overcome the challenges when we have that. And once it's aligned, it's easier. But at the end of the day, I want to say that they can count on us, and we will be here to help them, and of course to restore this very important region of the world.
Ambassador LaRocque, how much of what Prime Minister Chastanet had said applies to all the countries of the Caribbean? And what are you trying to do to get tourism back? And what's your suggestion about how we should handle the COVID debt?
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much. Once again, let me thank you for the work that you continue to do on behalf of our region. It's very important to have your voice, especially when we sometimes feel that we are voiceless in the international community. What Prime Minister Shastney said, you can basically multiply it almost to every single one of our member states. Now, some of our member states are a little less dependent, but I was looking at some figures recently. 10 CARICOM countries are among the top 20 in the world in terms of dependency on tourism. The impact of COVID in terms of the cost to our GDP is going to be in the region of about 30% of GDP for our region on average, with some much higher and some lower. We're projecting negative growth for our region ranging from between 6 to 7% to as much as 15%. Now, when you measure the magnitude of Hurricane Dorian on the Bahamas last year, GDP impact was about 25%. We're talking about in excess of 30%. You begin to understand the magnitude of the economic damage that we have. And we heard in the last panel, Prime Minister Motley says a lot of this, and Prime Minister Shastney, of course, a lot of this is being financed by debt. The fiscal space is dwindling. There's no space to do much of what you wanted to do in the first instance. And as your debt rises, so too does your credit rating go in the opposite direction. There is the need for us to look, for the international community to look at COVID as a disaster, as a global disaster, and a particular disaster for small, vulnerable economies. And there's no way we can grow ourselves out of this hole that we're in. There's need for an infusion of capital, multilateral capital at extremely concessional rates. The idea of debt moratoria, the idea of not including that debt stock on COVID as part of your normal debt stock so that your credit rating doesn't go through the floor. All of these things need to be attended to. But as small island states, we need that global voice. We need the multilateral institutions to come together. We need to focus on the OECD. We need our voice in the OECD. This is where a lot of the decisions take place, in G20 and in the OECD. We're not there. We're not there. So we need to have that done. I think we've done fairly well, as Prime Minister Shastney has said and Prime Minister Motley have said in the previous panel, in terms of flattening the curve. We've demonstrated to the world that we can, in fact, manage. We have the technical capacity to manage a health pandemic such as COVID. But it's in the economic fallout. This is where we need the greatest assistance. And in terms of having a common protocol, we do have common protocols, but different countries have different risk assessments. So you have to apply the protocol based on your particular risk assessments. And I think you can see a convergence with the CARICOM bubble that has been created. At least 8 countries in CARICOM so far will not require testing when traveling among themselves. And we hope to grow that out to all of CARICOM once you can meet the particular criteria. But we need to be able to speak with the international travel community with one voice. And the pre-testing before arriving is critical. The availability of tests at concessional rates, our region experienced very high costs in procuring test kits and in procuring PPEs, and sometimes we're not even able to do so. Thank goodness we had the mechanisms as a region to procure collaboratively. Hopefully the economies of scales will bring it down. We've been able to attract much of that. So there's much we've done, and there's much more we can do in that regard going forward.
Well, one of the things that you've said that I think I hope, if nothing else, we can bring some public light on this is, in general, the CARICOM countries have done a good job of managing their own COVID challenges. Yep. Part of that required people to be properly tested at the border and was definitely inevitably going to lead to a big drop in tourism. But you've done a good job, and yet you are the primary burden bearers because of tourism and what's happening. And it's led, as the Prime Minister said, to all this debt. I think the international community may have to rethink a lot of these mechanisms, international financial mechanisms, and you've almost got to take the COVID debt out of the calculation of all these countries. And it either needs to be, they need to find some way to write it off or to put it over here in a different long-term category where you keep the interest rates where they are now, which is effectively zero, because if you force this debt back into the mixture of all these countries, and then interest rates go up, either as you pointed out, Prime Minister, because the credit rating goes down or because the general economy begins to recover, everybody's going to be facing bankruptcy. And I might add, that also applies to a lot of wealthy countries. The United States has had to spend trillions of dollars because we didn't respond to COVID in a very good way for a long time. And we need to disaggregate our debt too. But certainly the most blameless actors in the world, it seems to me, are the CARICOM countries and countries around them who did a good job managing their own native COVID challenge, but had to put up barriers to travel and safety or deal with them for perfectly good reasons because of the COVID epidemic, and are now facing a calamitous level of debt. And one which will interfere with a panel I just had, which is the quick transformation to even more sustainable energy and other things which will benefit long-term economic growth in CARICOM. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I hope you will give all of us a chance to support you and continue to work on coming up with very specific things that will A, restart tourism more quickly and more broadly, and B, help you manage this debt. I saw when I was in St. Lucia last, I said we dedicated this 3 megawatt solar field, but I could see the whole future then of the Caribbean riding on making sustainable, green, and resilient investments in the economy that would create more jobs, raise incomes, and open even more doors of tourism. And now this COVID thing, because of the unusual way it bears down on you, has presented you with a problem that the world really owes it to you, the international financial community, the institutions. We may have to reimagine how they're organized, but I'm completely with you with that. You're being asked to bear a burden for problems like climate change you didn't cause, and now problems like COVID you managed well, but at the price of destroying your economy. And so I'll be interested to see what else we can do beyond what we've done already. And I want everybody listening to this to feel free to send your own ideas. But I feel that the United States in particular owes a lot to the CARICOM countries. And we need to try to be a good neighbor here. I also believe, by the way, you will become more and more attractive as time goes on as tourist destinations if you continue to march toward a greener, more sustainable policy, because people will come to see what nature has preserved, not what it has destroyed. I think that there are a lot of options here, and I'm not at all pessimistic about the future. I think that your tourism might even increase as the COVID abates by your neighbors in the area who feel more comfortable traveling close to home. But we've got to get this debt off your back. We've got to disaggregate the COVID debt and figure out what to do about it in a way that doesn't bankrupt your countries. Anyway, I wanted to ask questions, not speak, but I've been thinking about this for months now. I don't have an answer, but I'm working. If any of you, before we close, say anything else you'd like to say about something specific. If there's somebody watching this who would like to be helpful to your country, Prime Minister, or to the region, or to the cause of tourism, what can they do? What are your well-wishers that are watching this supposed to take away from this session and what you've just said?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would say to you that St. Lucia and the Caribbean has absolutely shown that you can coexist with COVID. It's said that we understand it much better. The option of shutting down is not an option, and it's going to have a severe impact. So tourism is not only affected, or the drop in tourism has not only affected us, it's affected the airline industry, it's affected your countries, because tourism is the largest industry in the world. Have a greater sense of urgency to get it back going, and we've shown that you can coexist with it. Gloria is 100% right in terms of creating one bubble in which we have an operating system that is common across the board. So the cruise industry, which has been severely impacted, we are now working to create protocols that consider all of us to be one destination. So when a ship comes in, the itinerary that they have, those countries are part of one singular destination, and we have a common protocol in place to deal with it, so it makes it easier for the ships to do. Gloria made the reference with regards to the airline industry. It's the same way. The Caribbean is a microcosm, as you indicated, Mr. President, of small towns and small cities throughout the United States. And I'm a big believer that in order to be successful at a macro level, you must first be successful at a micro level. And I think the lessons that we are learning here and we're succeeding at that can apply to small cities in the United States, Canada, and Europe, and is to create a forum where we can exchange best practices. And then the last thing I really want to say, Mr. President, is that I don't think any one of us in the Caribbean want to be viewed as being, this is a quid pro process. If the Caribbean can prosper economically, because of our size, we don't produce a lot of our products. So we depend on production from outside. So therefore, there is an immediate economic benefit to the developed world, our own success. You know from the three borders policy of security, the best way to secure the borders of America is having a strong economic activity and successful countries around your border, because that really provides the protection. I wanted that solutions can go to America without a visa, the same way that Caymanians, Bermudians can do that. And the reason they do that is because there is economic prosperity. People who have a home, who have a car, who enjoy life, tend to become a lot more conservative in their approach and much more respectful. So this is what we want for our region. All we're asking for is to help ourselves. We're not asking for aid. I don't want any aid. All I want is a fair, level playing field that allows us to compete on a global basis. And I think that all of us will prosper, we can do that. And as I said to you, the Caribbean is showing when it came to climate change, we've had to find ways to adapt. But sadly, the global economic architecture that you were making reference to, the rules that we're forced to engage in are unfair. What's so special about a 60% debt to GDP? Kingdom's debt to GDP has gone to 100%. I have no idea what the United States of America's debt to GDP is. We don't have a central bank that can print money for us. We have to borrow money on real terms. And because of the rules that are being imposed by the OECD, the World Bank, and the IMF, we're being stymied. And we really need your voice, Mr. President, and that of the WTTC and many of the other organizations to just give us a fair chance. That's all we're looking for.
I agree with that. First of all, if we're not going to disaggregate this debt, then the ratios are going to have to be changed for everybody.
Yeah,
correct.
We're out of time, but I'll give our other two participants a chance to make any closing remarks tonight. Gloria, you want to say anything before we go?
Yeah. Yes, President. I wanted to ask you, we need a couple of champions, because as the Caribbean is suffering, sometimes people think about travel and tourism as just the margarita and the beach and the beautiful sunset. In reality, as you know quite well, the social impact is significant. There are people that they are depending on this activity to provide food to their table, right? And also has to do with sustainability. And sometimes we need champions to put things in perspective. We need those voices. So I would like to invite the Prime Minister and, of course, the Ambassador to help us to communicate that as well. We have the data. Is there 50 4% employment is women, 30% is youth. The diversity, the inclusion, and all of that is very important. But sometimes we need the voices to just say, it's not the margarita, the beautiful beaches. It's much more than that. It's the opportunity to make a difference, to grow, and to have a better future. So tourism really provides that. And we really would like to invite you to champion more the cause and communicate about the social impact and to accelerate our sustainable agenda as one of the positive of COVID, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Thank you. Mr. President, I've seen what CGI Action Network can do with renewable energy. I've seen you mobilize CEOs from the top players in the industry in renewables. And I think if we could apply that network to the travel industry, to the travel and tourism industry, to address some of the issues that Prime Minister Shastny has mentioned in terms of getting us to have a common protocol and addressing the global travel, I think it would be of tremendous help to us. Even if we just start by getting them to agree on testing before arrival, that's going to minimize so much of the trouble that we're faced with right now. So I think if you could apply your network to that, there's a bigger picture, of course, on the debt and on the access to concessional financing. But a very short-term response would be in the travel industry and having a network mobilize these executives.
That's a very good idea, and I'll see what we can do about it. Thank you all so much. You've given me a lot to think about and given all of us a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you.